Well, good morning. It's that's what I like to hear. Everybody coming back and talking to us. Welcome once again. This is day two of our 125th anniversary symposium, and I'm Jeff Saylor, the president and CEO here at the zoo. Today is really exciting in that we have partners of ours and employees of ours from around the world that are coming here today to talk about the really unique projects that we have around the world with many different species of animals. At the end of today at 2 p.m., we'll actually be doing some more kind of open house around the zoo. Most of it will be on the south side of the zoo. There'll be a QRL code that'll come up on the screen at the end of the presentations today. You can take a picture of it with your phone and it'll show you where all the different stations are on the south side. The goal is to have our speakers with the animals they work with on the south side of the zoo and with the Toledo Zoo employees that also work with those animals so that you can have any of your questions answered and get the opportunity to discuss about their work more. I'm going to speak this morning to get us kicked off about zoos. Oh, are we ready to go there, Corey? There we go. Zoos as conservation engines. Maybe if we can get that light turned off so people can see the screens a little better. You know, everyone likes coming to the zoos. We talked a little bit about our mission statement yesterday. You know, basically it's distilled down to enjoy, inspire, educate, and act. And, you know, we don't have any misconceptions. The lion's share of people come to the zoo to have a great day with their family. I mean, that's what they do. That's what they've done for decades, is come here to have a great day out with their family, to generate memories. We talked about, you know, everyone here having photos with their kids on the stone elephant sculptures and remembering certain animals or certain events and how important that is to them. But I think what often gets lost, because there are so many things for us to communicate about on a daily basis about an institution this size and of this age, is we're working globally. And that's not unique to zoos. I mean, I think we have a very unique kind of conservation program, global conservation program. But zoos really are what I consider to be conservation engines. They are in a very unique space within their communities that allows them to achieve some really incredible actions around the world. We saw yesterday with some amazing projects right here in Ohio and in Michigan, where the zoos were able, this zoo was able to actually work to save species, but also connect those programs directly to the public. Everything from the Sturgeon Fest, where the kids are actually going and releasing the sturgeon into the water, to this amazing program where it's actually the people in a trailer park on the lake that are conserving the turtles and actually tracking these endangered turtles and making sure that they all survive and that their nests survive. And so, you know, that's just a small portion of what zoos are able to do and what they've done for many, many years. So we often hear from detractors that, you know, zoos really aren't conservation places or places of conservation, that they're all about making a dollar. But I've spent a lot of my adult life studying what, you know, the creation of zoos in the United States. And the zoos in the United States, believe it or not, have had this ethos for conservation from the very beginning. Unlike the zoos in Europe that mostly originated out of royal menageries, and they were really for the elite, they weren't for the common people, zoos in America sprung out of the industrialization of America in the 1880s, and they were really at that beginning of things like parks departments and this idea of getting the factory worker back out into nature for their days off as a restorative mechanism. And at the time, people don't really think about it, the 1880s to the 1920s for nature was a pretty bleak time in the United States. If you're driving around Northwest Ohio, except for one tiny patch next to Archibald called Gall Woods, every woodlot in Northwest Ohio is a maximum of 80 or 90 years old. So everything was cut down by the time we got to the 1920s, except for that one little patch of woods that's preserved near Archibald in the western part of the state. And it wasn't just the woods. I mean, the bird populations, the deer populations, all these things had crashed. Believe it or not, Canada geese were nearly extinct at that period of time. The white-tailed deer was nearly extinct. The wood duck was nearly extinct. All of these species that we today like have to dodge on the road, you really had to work to find 90 years ago. They were nearly gone. At this same period of time is when a lot of individuals started thinking about, well, we want to provide wholesome entertainment for our factory workers. We want to have a place for people living in cities to come back out and connect with nature. And, we're going to do this by creating these zoos. And, there's a very, very famous zoo, the Bronx Zoo, which is, believe it or not, only 1 year older than the Toledo Zoo. They started and opened their gates in 1899. We opened ours in 1900. From the very beginning, they were focused on how are we preserving all these big game animals that have been hunted to near extinction. And they started with the bison. And we wouldn't have bison today if it weren't for the Bronx Zoo. They worked with the last tiny little herds throughout the United States. There were less than 100 animals left. And they were able to bring some of these animals to the Bronx Zoo and begin to breed them and then begin to send them back out to protected areas. And so from pretty much day one, the U.S. zoos were focused on not only providing a great place for people to come and have, a wholesome day out and some educational activities, but also to save these species. Now, what makes a zoo so uniquely positioned to accomplish this? Well, one, we kind of last forever, right? I mean, we've been around, we talked about yesterday, 125 years. You can see it just in our buildings. I mean, we have buildings that are 90 and 80 and 90, 100 years old, which is pretty incredible, like this Carnivore Cafe. But because we're in these communities and we've been around for so long, we have the ability to garner amazing public support. We're an area of focus within the community where people can come together to have a good time, but also be mobilized for a cause. And that love for things like the buildings and the individual animals here at the zoo can then be leveraged to achieve goals around the world. And here's a great example. This zoo has been supported by tax levies to some extent since the 1980s. And, our last one passed with, I think, 71% approval. Not a lot of politicians get 71% approval. The zoo gets 71% approval. And being able to be this trusted source within the community really gives us the power to do good around the world that a lot of other institutions, universities, what have you, just don't have the same ability to do. Dr. Cross talked yesterday about how having the ability to support these individual research programs long term is critical. Here's the graph of the painted turtle population within Lucas County, this one park in Lucas County, and how if you look at it at any one point in time, if you just studied it here or you just studied it here or here, you would get a totally different sort of result if you were to say, was the population doing well, is the population doing poorly? But we've been doing this for 25 years. We can look at the population and say, well, actually it does this. And we keep an eye on it to make sure it's actually not doing that. But, you think about it, the average grad student, they don't want to be doing this research for more than 3 or 4 years before they have to go out and get their own job. If you just took any 3 or 4 year period for collecting your data, you wouldn't be able to really tell what's going on. But with the zoo, we can. Taking these two things together, this trust, this ability to educate, this ability to communicate, this long-term ability to support, we're able to really help species in the wild. So, on the one side, we have the Blandings turtles that Dr. Cross talked about yesterday. I mean, that's a species that lives over 100 years. It's actually the longest living vertebrate in North America. And so a zoo is really the best position to work on its conservation. I mean, you could have a whole population of 80-year-old turtles, but no babies, and it's basically a functionally extinct population at that point. the same time, we're able to help groups like the Tasmanian government with the Tasmanian devil for a species that really needed continual support in order to track down the last individuals with distinct genetic variation and be able to save that variation so that the species will be able to rebound in the wild. The other thing that zoos are really well positioned for is we have so many unique skills outside of just sort of being this trusted place that lasts forever within a community. I mean, here I have Nick Gordon. He works in our reptile department. He was another zoo teen that became a zoo employee and moved up the ladder. What Nick's doing right there is moving a king cobra. You know, one of the most venomous snakes in the world. That individual there is probably about 9 feet long. There's not a lot of people in North America that can do what Nick's doing right now. I mean, we can take anyone here who'd like to try. We'll go over and do it later. But I'm thinking Nick might be a little more skilled. Or within our bird department, hand raising this baby flamingo. You know, looks all fun and fluffy, but I can tell you that's an anxiety-inducing activity right there. Because when they open their little mouths, you can't necessarily tell what's the esophagus and what's the trachea. And you don't want to put that tube down the wrong one. But I've watched our team, and it looks like an assembly line of flamingos. They might have 12 flamingos at a time, one after another, and people, you know, just moving that thing around. Almost looks like that classic Lucy episode with the chocolate. But they you know, raising these little babies from day one and not losing any of them. Like just knowing from experience, if we put it in like this, it goes right in the right part of the mouth and feeds this little baby. You'll hear later today how that particular skill has been transferred around the world to help other species. It's not even just about the things we do with animals. I mean, this is, you know, while the picture is of a sturgeon, the point of this slide is what we can do in terms of messaging and communications. You know, we don't take for granted that you could do all this good work, but if you can't tell anybody about it, really what's the point? And so the Toledo Zoo has amassed a massive communications platform that allows us to tell our story, it allows us to mobilize people, allows us to take activities like Sturgeon Fest, get that message out there and get hundreds upon hundreds of people to come to that event and to work with us to release these sturgeon in the wild, which is pretty incredible if you think about it. But it also allows us now, I mean, in the modern world, to talk about our work around the globe. And then how do we take this and go to the next level up, right? Because we can do these great things, we have actually looked at communications as being, you know, one of the primary pillars of what we do with conservation. You'll hear from our partners in Nepal today. Part of that program has been working with birds in Nepal. We discovered there was no field guide to the birds in Nepal in their language. You know, we were able to get 800 bird guides translated into the Nepalese language and distributed around Nepal to help educate, to help communicate, because if you can't care about these animals, why would you want to save them? So just amazing that, you know, as a zoo, we can just do those sorts of things. And then last but not least, we're able to go about generating funding in a lot of different ways. Now, the zoo itself, it takes a lot to run this zoo. It takes a lot of money to run this zoo. It takes a lot of money to run it well. But we're able, through our events like Zoo to Do, which is this right here. This is we had our largest Zoo to Do ever last month and generated lots and lots of funds that help us with our mission. But it just shows that, once again, because not only do we have the staying power of a long-lived institution, we have the skill sets that are very unique, we have the ability to talk about what we're doing, but we also have the ability to mobilize financial support to make it all happen. And when you put all these things together, it means zoos are very, very powerful when it comes to conserving animals in the wild. But I'll also tell you, that's not the only thing we use to support. We're working it from communities all the way up to the globe. So while some of that mission is helping gorillas in Africa or saving the Tasmanian devil in Australia, in the same vein, we're we're providing free preschool classes to kids that couldn't have them here in Toledo. Or we're underwriting programs to get people out into the field to get skills so they can go to college and be biologists. So we're underwriting memberships for those that can't afford it. So it's really this combined sort of set of activities that makes us supremely unique when it comes to engaging the public and saving wildlife. And like I said, this isn't a new phenomenon. Every species up here would not exist today without zoos. And the Toledo Zoo is one of the primary organizations that saved that little frog from Tanzania. And then a National Zoo in DC saved the little monkey, the golden lion tamarin. Zoos like Phoenix in Arizona saved the Arabian oryx. San Diego and Los Angeles zoos and the Peregrine Fund saved the Californian condor. I mean, there were only 23 California condors left around 1980. And I think now there are about 500 birds, of which about 400 of them are in the wild. And there were people that didn't want them saved. But the zoos went out, they got the last of these birds, they used all these skills I just talked about to get this bird back in the wild, which is the largest flying bird in North America. It's meaningful to the First Nations, it's meaningful to bird watchers, it's meaningful to the people of California, Arizona, Utah, and Oregon, where they now fly free. And that wouldn't have happened without zoos and their ability, like I said, to marshal all these unique assets to save a species. With us, we're looking at how we can use or how we can affect animals in a variety of ways. You'll hear later today about work that we do with partners in South Africa with elephants that focuses around hormones and their reproductive biology, where we can take knowledge that we gain from the elephants here at the zoo, knowledge from elephants in the wild, and use that to both help both populations. Be able to look at elephants in the wild and say, what's going on with them? Being able to use it with the elephants in the zoo to assume that, or to assure that they're healthy. And Dr. Carrie Morfeld will be talking about that. It'll be a very exciting conversation. Gorillas. We have a very special program with gorillas with our friends from Limbe Wildlife Center, who will be talking later today. They are entrusted with caring for all of these gorillas that basically orphaned through the bushmeat trade or injured in some way. They have to pretty much take them all, and we're helping them with what we can do to provide funds and skills to improve their welfare, and you're going to hear a lot about that. You'll hear in a few moments about our work in the Solomon Islands with the Santa Cruz ground dove, a species that was nearly wiped out, and if it weren't for the Toledo Zoo being able to step in, we would have lost most of the world's global population within a couple of weeks. The Tasmanian devil, which is near and dear to my heart, the work that the Toledo Zoo and the San Diego Zoo has done in Tasmania has meant the animal has sort of persisted through its disease epidemic, and now the number one killer is cars. So to have taken care of killer number one, and now we're working on killer number two, it takes a village to keep these things going, but this is an amazing little animal. It's the largest native carnivore left in Australia. Many of you probably watch the Tasmanian devil on Bugs Bunny on Saturday mornings. They're a little different than that animal, but not much. They like to eat everything, and they don't spin around, but they scream a lot. We're active, and I believe my last count was 14 countries around the world, including the United States. I will say one way that we are different from a lot of other zoos, though, is we really look at where we can leverage our skill sets to have the greatest impact. We also look to say, all right, what are the milestones, mile markers in this journey with this conservation program to get us to an endpoint? What is that endpoint? Is it getting the animals back in the wild? Is it getting an organization to be self-sufficient? Is it doing any sort of other thing to get us to a point where that population can kind of take off on its own? You'll hear tomorrow about work we're doing in the Solomon Islands to actually transfer skills so that country can take over care of their own birds, which is amazing. Here we have a really unique little animal that probably is very close to hitting that milestone. This is a Aruba Island rattlesnake from the island of Aruba in the Caribbean. And the Toledo Zoo has been working with this animal for a very, very long time. Kent, I think that's you up there on the thing. We've been working with this animal for decades. We were instrumental in getting the first national park started on the island of Aruba. And, our recent trips down there have shown that there are quite a few rattlesnakes. It looks like they're rebounding. Where now the question is, are they still endangered? And if they're not, well, job done. On to the next thing. Like I said, the gorilla piece is really a unique opportunity for us. We couldn't be more thankful to Limbey Wildlife Center for allowing us to work with them. The Toledo Zoo's team are some at the forefront of welfare science in U.S. zoos. Beth Posta, who runs our welfare program, has been instrumental in many of the standards that we now have within the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, helping design welfare assessments that we use to evaluate animals on an annual basis or even multiple times a year. And to be able to take that body of science and say, okay, if we start measuring it for these animals at this center, then what can we do to help improve it? What are the funds that we can provide? What are the projects we can do for these animals to improve their welfare? You hear about snow leopard work that we're doing in Nepal. It's a very new program, but working in an area where no other conservation organization is working in Nepal for an animal that, at least in Toledo, our public just adores. And then this little fellas, pied tamarins from Brazil. And they have the unique distinction of having one of the smallest ranges of any primate that happens to be centered on the megacity of Manaus in Brazil. So most of their entire habitat is now a giant industrialized city. And there, it's a really interesting program because it combines knowledge that our staff has on welfare and care to help with animals that end up in rehabilitation situations or rescue situations, but also draws from the work we've done with Wild Toledo, which many of you heard about yesterday with our native plant restorations, to restore native parks and greenways to be able to create a connective set of refuges for these monkeys within that city, and developing bridges to get them from one patch to another so that they don't electrocute themselves on power lines or get hit by cars or taken out by dogs. And so here we're able to take several different things that we do uniquely and bring them to bear on this little animal. And at the same time, the population was basically declining almost to extinction in the U.S. We took on that population and have doubled the size of it in about, 2 years? So we have about 20 animals left. I think there's 49 now, which is great, 16 of which live here at the Toledo Zoo. And we just keep cranking them out to make sure that there's this insurance population, but probably even more value. We won't send these animals back to the wild, but what we will do is learn new skills about how to care for them, understand what their medical needs are, what you do in a trauma situation, what stressors might affect them. And then that can be directly transferred to Brazil to help with these animals that come out of wild situations that are have had a traumatic episode. And last but not least, there's our incredible logo, the hippos. Probably the most beloved animal here at the zoo, and one that we've had only a little bit of work done over the years. We had a zookeeper that did work with hippos, probably 30 years ago. And now we're working with Dr. Lochran Traill. You'll hear from him today in ways that we can mitigate human-wildlife conflict with hippos in the wild. So now hippos, one of their biggest threats is retaliation by farmers for the damage the hippos do to their gardens. You can imagine if you had a hippo in your garden, you're going to see the impact the next day. But what really makes these animals significant from a human-wildlife conflict standpoint is, these gardens are critical to the livelihoods of the people in Africa. So they leave their teenagers out there to watch the crops at night. And if you're coming down in the middle of the night to scare away an animal of this magnitude, there's a good chance you're going to be killed. And so we're working on ways to mitigate that and to actually make sure those conflicts don't come into being. Because if a child is killed by a hippopotamus, there's a lot of retaliatory killings of hippopotamuses, whether you got the right one or not. We want to do away with that particular conflict, and you'll hear about some extremely amazing work that's being done that we just got the data for in the last month or so. So I think this is going to be an incredible day, some great conversation or great talks. What we've been doing as far as questions is we'll have a break at the end of 2 or 3 talks, and the speakers will be around, so catch them up and ask them questions. We're doing that throughout the day, and then like I said, the individual speakers will be at their animal exhibits in the afternoon for further discussion. So thank you, I appreciate your time. And with that, I will introduce Joe Wood, who heads all of our global conservation work around the world. So, and actually doesn't even live here, lives in Australia. So, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, hello everyone. My name is Joe Wood, and I am Toledo Zoo's Manager of International Conservation Programs. Essentially, this means that I oversee our involvement in all of the projects which you will hear about this morning, and quite a few others as well. My talk today is going to focus on leveraging expertise to save species, and specifically the importance of institutional specialization and mechanisms for the transfer of expertise as vital components in a strategy for achieving this. It's probably best if I begin with a bit of background on my own career journey and how I came to be in my current role. I got my first zookeeping job when I was 17. And for about 12 years, I moved between various British zoos with a gap in the middle when I returned to education and obtained a bachelor's degree in animal behavior. I then went up to Cambridge University to study for a master's in conservation leadership. Off the back of that, in October 2017, I was offered a short-term contract with BirdLife International to lead a project in the Solomon Islands. And I'm using the word project quite loosely here. This was essentially an emergency intervention. Okay. There's an extremely complex backstory here, but I'm going to try and break my own record for telling it as succinctly as possible. So, starting the clock. This is a species called the Santa Cruz ground dove. Once found throughout the eastern Solomon Islands and much of Vanuatu. Ecologically naive, disastrously impacted by the arrival of invasive mammalian predators. Historically very little known, and at one time feared extinct. This is actually the only specimen held by the Natural History Museum in London. Rediscovered on Tinakula, a tiny, remote, and uninhabited volcanic island. Subsequently subject to a mass poaching event to supply demand from collectors in the Middle East, shortly followed by a volcanic eruption. My brief was to locate the birds, which were suspected to be held by commercial wildlife dealers in Honiara, the capital city of the Solomon Islands, to work with local authorities to obtain custody of them, and to take charge of their rehabilitation. Which is how I ended up with 110 very scruffy Santa Cruz ground doves, housed in temporary aviaries and presumed to represent a sizable percentage of the entire global population. Okay, that was 1 minute and 52 seconds. It's pretty good. On one level, this represented mission complete. I had done the thing which I was hired to do. However, having got ourselves embroiled in this situation, we were faced with a new challenge in working out what on earth to do with these birds now that we had them. The volcanic eruption on Tinakula, combined with the presence of cats and rats on every other island in their historic range, meant that returning them to the wild just wasn't on the cards. Nor was there any local organisation with the capacity to provide them with the specialist care they needed. The only remaining course of action was for me to stay on until we could work out a coherent plan. But that would require funds that we simply didn't have. And it was at this point that Toledo Zoo stepped in. They put me on their payroll, which marked the beginning of my association with the zoo, and committed to supporting me to do whatever needed to be done. This is actually a nice example of another factor which is vitally important if conservation organisations are to maximise their impact, and that is agility. So conservation is, after all, a crisis discipline. As such, a willingness to make snap decisions, often involving allocation of resources, often based on limited information, is absolutely crucial. And so, stay I did. And with Toledo Zoo now at the helm, we gave some serious thought to our options. As I alluded to earlier, the fundamental problem we were up against was that the expertise needed for the long-term management of this vitally important captive population just didn't exist in the Solomon Islands at this time. However, there were, of course, plenty of organisations elsewhere in the world that were more than capable of taking on this responsibility. In light of the precariousness of the situation, we therefore brokered a loan agreement between the Solomon Islands government and Mandai Wildlife in Singapore. Under the terms of this, 60 Santa Cruz ground doves were transferred to the Singapore Bird Park in August 2018 as the nucleus of a now thriving insurance population. And again, we could have called it a day, stuck a ribbon on the project, declared it a conservation win, and gone home. To do that, though, would have been to turn a blind eye to the plight of a whole raft of endemic species in the Solomon Islands, some of which will almost certainly be lost without prompt intervention. The lack of in-country capacity was an obvious barrier to the establishing of captive insurance populations of some of these species. But we had no shortage of extremely relevant institutional expertise here in Toledo. This became the seed of an idea. Why not use the group of Santa Cruz ground doves remaining in Honiara as a catalyst and work with local organisations towards the creation of a dedicated conservation breeding facility? We envisaged this as being a place where populations of endemic species could be kept safe from the threats facing them in the wild, where they could be studied, and where we could train the Solomon Islanders who would continue this work into the future. We started small, recruiting a team of local staff and teaching them the absolute basics of animal husbandry: diet preparation, biosecurity, behavioural observation, record keeping. We were still operating out of a very ramshackle, supposedly temporary facility. But we soon started having breeding success with Santa Cruz ground doves. And it's worth flagging here that, as far as I am aware, this was the first time that any endangered species had been bred in captivity in the Solomon Islands. One somewhat unexpected consequence of this work was that I started to be asked to contribute to discussions regarding the conservation of other threatened pigeons and doves. The feeling being that the lessons we were learning in the Solomons might be relevant elsewhere. Not only did this turn out to be very true, but it has since provided the basis for a really excellent dad joke. These days, when I'm asked if I set out to build a career focused on the conservation of this particular family of birds, I say no. I just got pigeonholed. Thank you. So, in 2019, I participated in a conservation planning workshop in the Philippines, which sparked Toledo Zoo's involvement in conservation efforts for Negros bleeding heart doves, which is, of course, the subject of the talk by Matt and Bella, which you will hear shortly. Also in 2019, I travelled to southeast Brazil to contribute to discussions around this bird, the blue-eyed ground dove. Another species once thought lost, with no records for 75 years. The rediscovery of a tiny population was announced in 2016. I had the opportunity to see them in the wild, in Cerrado habitat, near the small town of Bochamarim. And I also joined a workshop hosted by Parque das Aves in Foz do Iguaçu, along with an international panel of experts and various local stakeholders. And actually, the man standing next to me in this top photo is Chuck Sabini, so previously curator of birds at Toledo Zoo, now at the Bronx, and someone who continues to be very closely involved in conservation efforts for blue-eyed ground doves. Back to the Solomon Islands, where, as well as training a new team and breeding Santa Cruz ground doves, I spent a very frustrating couple of years attempting to convince the government of the need for a purpose-built conservation facility, requesting their help to establish one, and getting absolutely nowhere. Eventually, however, we were able to thrash out an agreement and secure significant investment from a private sector partner. With all our ducks in a row and work on a shiny new aviary block underway, we began 2020 feeling very optimistic. Ha ha. By this point, I had met the Australian woman who is now my wife, and we were expecting our first child. The standard of healthcare available in the Solomons is shockingly poor. So in early 2020, we temporarily relocated to Sydney. I left the local staff in charge of the birds, the idea being that I would make short trips every few weeks to check on things, including the construction of the new facility. And I did go back in March, just as rumours were starting to circulate about coronavirus and border closures. While in Honiara, I got a call from a friend of mine, an Australian diplomat, who strongly suggested that I get to the airport and be on the next flight out. I did as I was told, and the next day, Australia closed their international border. It was more than 2 years before I was able to return to the Solomon Islands, and these were some pretty dark days. The impact of the virus itself was fairly minimal, but economic hardship resulting from repeated lockdowns and border closures eventually led to a serious outbreak of civil unrest. Nevertheless, the majority of the Santa Cruz ground doves survived this period, which is testament to three things. Firstly, Toledo Zoo's commitment to providing the local team with whatever support we possibly could. Secondly, the effectiveness of the training which they had received, which equipped them to care for the birds as well as circumstances allowed. And thirdly, and most importantly, their willingness to take great personal risks in order to continue providing that care. The fact that we still had a project to return to is entirely due to their bravery and dedication. And day to day, there wasn't much for me to usefully do. This meant that, like a lot of other people, I suddenly ended up with a lot of time to think. One thing I kept coming back to was the clear relevance of skills and knowledge developed at the Toledo Zoo to conservation programs all around the world. Our teams have expertise in a whole range of areas, but there were some things where we were quite clearly leading the field. One of the things we're really good at is establishing and managing captive populations of delicate pigeon and dove species. A good example involves this bird, the pink-necked fruit dove. This is an Indonesian species, restricted to montane forest and increasingly threatened in the wild. Pink-necked fruit doves have actually been in AZA collections since the mid-1980s, and they initially did fairly well. They were bred in several collections, additional birds were brought in from the wild, and the population peaked at 45 individuals in 1994. Then things started to go wrong. There was a gradual decline over the next couple of decades. By 2011, there were only 11 birds left, spread across 8 institutions. Sadly, this story isn't particularly remarkable. In fact, it's entirely representative of the sustainability crisis in modern zoo populations. There are various complex reasons behind this trend, but the bottom line is that rates of breeding aren't sufficient to offset losses. The case of the pink-necked fruit dove is unusual because of what happened after 2011, when a decision was made to consolidate those remaining 11 birds at the Toledo Zoo. The figures speak for themselves here. 23 birds by 2016, 68 by 2018, 107 by 2021. So, how did we achieve this? Well, institutional commitment, offshore breeding facilities, expert husbandry, and, crucially, willingness to push the boundaries of intensive population management. There are some important things to understand about the breeding biology of pigeons and doves. One is that they breed in monogamous pairs and produce clutches of no more than 2 eggs, or, in the case of fruit doves, just 1. Another is that the majority of breeding attempts in the wild will fail. Nests will be predated or lost to other causes. As a result, pairs are very quick to abandon nests which they believe to be compromised, and will quickly go to nest again after a failed attempt. This means that in captivity, there is the potential to radically increase reproductive output by salvaging abandoned eggs or chicks which would otherwise be lost, or even intentionally removing eggs to encourage pairs to lay again. The problem with that is that these extra chicks then need to be reared by a foster species, which involves its own set of challenges, or hand-reared. Hand-rearing small dove chicks is notoriously difficult. This is partly because they hatch in a very underdeveloped state, but also because of another quirk of their biology, shared with just a couple of other bird families, which is that they've evolved to feed on a substance called crop milk, a high-fat, high-protein secretion produced by the lining of their parents' crops. Despite this, our bird team have been able to hand-rear fruit doves with ever greater rates of success, and this was a key factor in the rapid growth of this population. Incidentally, we employed a similar strategy to establish and grow a captive population of many coloured fruit doves, starting with 16 birds collected from the wild in American Samoa. But how is any of this relevant to international projects? Well, it ties back to the 2019 Blue-eyed Ground Dove workshop. The discussions held during this were subsequently captured in a written report, which concluded that the establishing of a captive population of blue-eyed ground doves was an essential safeguard against extinction in the wild. However, the risks involved in attempting to capture adult birds were considered to be unacceptably high. The recommended course of action was therefore to harvest eggs from wild nests, hatch them in incubators, and hand rear the resulting chicks. Since this was known to be a very difficult thing to do, Park Dazavi's staff initially attempted to develop a protocol using the far more common ruddy ground dove as a model species. By mid-2020, though, they had failed to achieve any success at all, and the feasibility of this strategy was being re-evaluated. So, we had this very specific expertise in Toledo and a clear need for that expertise in the recovery of a critically endangered species in Brazil. What we were lacking was a strategy for the transfer of expertise. This became the basis of the challenge I set myself. Could I act as an effective conduit for the flow of skills and knowledge between the two teams? Beginning with the obvious first step of building an aviary in my garden. I stocked this with pairs of 3 small dove species, diamond doves, Namaqua doves, and ruddy ground doves, all of which were acquired from a local pet shop. I encouraged them to breed, artificially incubated all the eggs, and commenced my own attempts at hand rearing. I was able to draw on my own past experience, but I also spent a lot of time pestering our bird keepers and documenting every shred of information which they were able to pass on. Eventually, using this approach, and with a fair bit of trial and error, I was able to hit on a method which was consistently successful with these small seed-eating species. I subsequently compiled an exhaustive set of guidelines, which I shared with the team at Park Dazavi's. However, I also stressed something which I had suspected all along, namely that rigid adherence to a set protocol was unlikely to work, and that the key ingredient for success was an ability to read the chicks, to interpret subtle changes in behavior and respond accordingly. This ability can only be developed through direct experience, and the more of it, the better. That was one example of an area of knowledge with obvious relevance to conservation programs focused on a whole range of pigeon and dove species. But I knew that there were others. Many people are surprised to learn about the enormous diversity in this bird family. But in terms of their conservation, there are big areas of overlap. This means that lessons learned with one species do tend to be relevant to others, and that there is much to be gained by the sharing of information between organizations and individuals working on programs all over the world. I also knew that there were attempts being made to encourage this cross-pollination, and that was, after all, how I ended up at workshops in the Philippines and Brazil, but that there was no formal mechanism to facilitate this. There was, however, a template that we could use. The IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, is an umbrella organization and undoubtedly the most important conservation body in the world. It is comprised of 6 commissions, of which the largest is the Species Survival Commission, SSC. SSC, in turn, is made up of a global network of over 8,000 experts who are members of one or more specialist groups. The purpose of these specialist groups is to address conservation issues relating to a particular group of organisms or around broader problems such as climate change and wildlife trade. Although there were active specialist groups for many bird families, there had historically not been one for pigeons and doves. And this seemed like an oversight, given that they are one of the most threatened groups of birds in the world, as well as one of the most ecologically important. On inquiring, I discovered that 2 previous attempts to establish a specialist group had failed to gain traction. But with the support of the Toledo Zoo leadership, I decided that it was worth trying again. We drafted a really watertight proposal document explaining exactly why a specialist group was needed, what its goals would be and how it would operate. And I wrote individual emails to people all over the world who are working with threatened pigeons and doves, asking if they would like to become founding members. When we judged that we had a critical mass of people on board, we submitted an application to the SSC Chair's office, and this was subsequently approved. The IUCN SSC Pigeon and Dove Specialist Group was formally launched in March 2021 with Toledo Zoo as host organisation. And from that point on, the specialist group, and by extension the zoo, became the global authority for conservation issues relating to this group of birds. Eventually, of course, the world opened up again, and all sorts of things suddenly became possible. I was at last able to return to the Solomon Islands and continue laying the groundwork for a fantastic program of ongoing capacity building. This is now ably managed by Narelle Wilson, who you will hear from tomorrow. The Pigeon and Dove Specialist Group rapidly began picking up steam, and we created a steering committee to oversee its future direction. The Toledo Zoo also established an annual grant of $30,000, which is set aside for projects focused on the conservation of pigeons and doves and nominated by the steering committee. So far, we have provided funding and in-kind support for a search for this extraordinary bird, the tooth-billed pigeon in Samoa. Officially a lost species, certainly on the brink of extinction. This effort to locate surviving individuals was actually initiated by the specialist group in collaboration with BirdLife International, the Samoa Conservation Society, and the Samoan government. Last year, our team succeeded in obtaining a verified sighting of a tooth-billed pigeon, proving that all is not yet lost. We are now working towards a program of targeted conservation actions, certainly involving control of feral cats, which we have identified as the primary threat, potentially combined with biobanking. Grenada dove in the Caribbean. We have financed an investigation led by staff from Chester University in the UK into the distribution and impact of invasive mammalian predators. And most recently, Tuxtla quail doves in Mexico. We are supporting an in-country organisation to facilitate local community-led monitoring of this endangered endemic species. And blue-eyed ground doves, what's happening there? Well, the team at Parc des Aves, using our guidelines and with support from me and the Toledo Zoo bird keepers, were eventually able to achieve successful hand-rearing of ruddy ground dove chicks. However, the wild population of blue-eyed ground doves continued to decline, and a survey at the beginning of 2023 recorded just 14 individuals. And it was decided that it was now or never. I received an email asking if I would be prepared to return to Brazil to provide direct support for the rearing of the very first chicks to be hatched under human care. And this was made possible thanks to some nimble funding from Toledo Zoo. Just one clutch of 2 eggs was harvested for this initial attempt, and they were already halfway through their 12-day incubation period. It was all a bit of a mad rush, but I arrived at the field station in Botcham just as the first egg was hatching. I wish that I had longer to talk about this. It was simultaneously one of the most nerve-wracking and rewarding things that I've ever done. The very short version is that despite a few heart-stopping moments, we succeeded in rearing 2 beautiful chicks, a male and a female. 2024 was a very poor breeding season due to the late arrival of the rains. Only one more chick, a male, was added to the captive population, and the number of wild adults dipped even lower, to just 11 birds. This year, however, has been a resounding success. Not only were 3 more chicks successfully hand-reared in Bottom Room, but a breeding pair of blue-eyed ground doves, consisting of the female from 2023 and the male from 2024, was established in an aviary at Parc des Aves. So far, this pair have produced an astounding 9 captive bred chicks, making me a very proud blue-eyed ground dove granddad. Worth noting here that 3 of these chicks would have been lost had they not been hand-reared, so further mirroring our work with fruit doves in Toledo. We're certainly on our way to establishing a viable captive insurance population, but we're not out of the woods yet. We know that these birds are genetically bottlenecked, and that this may well have ramifications down the line. Toledo Zoo is therefore working with our partners in Brazil to investigate the feasibility of establishing cultured cell lines with a view to potential genetic manipulation. So, where do we go from here? How can we continue to build on the achievements of the last few years and the strategies which are clearly working for us? It's obvious that the Pigeon and Dove Specialist Group is performing a sorely needed function, and we will be continuing our efforts to expand its membership and influence. We've just released the first issue of a biannual newsletter, which we hope will be an effective way of catalysing yet more collaboration between people and organisations working with these birds. But we also know 2 other things. One is that we have barely scratched the surface in terms of the wealth of knowledge which is held by our people in Toledo and which is becoming ever more relevant to the conservation of species in their natural range. The other is that while there are many cases where it is sufficient to simply tell, to share information and observations, there are other instances where it is necessary to show, to provide hands-on guidance and mentorship. This is why we've taken the first steps towards the creation of a dedicated team of talented conservation professionals who will be deployed wherever in the world our expertise is most required. Oliver Crowther, who you will also hear from tomorrow, is the first member of this team. To sum up then, how can zoos leverage expertise to save species? Well, they can specialise. As you will hear from our other speakers, the Toledo Zoo is a driving force for the conservation of all kinds of wonderful animals in many different countries. However, about half of our international portfolio consists of projects focused on pigeons and doves. We know that we can do these well, that our institutional expertise is relevant, and that we can count on the support of the network we've established via the IUCN Specialist Group. The other thing zoos can do is capitalise on their position as holders of a vast bank of knowledge relating to the intensive management of animal populations. The hard truth is that many ecosystems are now in a very poor state, that more interventionist management strategies are called for, and that the line between the wild and captivity is becoming increasingly blurred. We therefore need to make sure that we continue to attract passionate and skilled people, that we enable them to hone their talents in our zoos, and that we have clear strategies for transferring their expertise to where it is needed most. On a personal level, I'm increasingly convinced that this is one of the most valuable roles that zoos can play in the modern world. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Joe. We'll have one other presentation before break. This is Dr. Paris Singh. of BIOCOS, Nepal. He'll be talking about conservation above the clouds, saving pheasants, snow leopards, and red pandas in Nepal. Coming up here.
Thank you, Jeff. Good morning, everyone. Namaste and greetings from the Himalayas of Nepal. And it is truly an honor to stand here today at the 125th anniversary of the Toledo Zoo. And so far, on the tours yesterday and day before yesterday, and the very impressive presentation that's done by different members and staffs of Toledo Zoo. And I really impressed by the work here, and definitely the Toledo Zoo is a great place that has inspired generation to care for wildlife. And recently, we made this year, actually, from 2025, we made a collaboration with the Toledo Zoo for snow leopard and red panda, as well as chair pheasant conservation in Nepal. And before begin my presentation, I wish to congratulate Toledo Zoo for 125th years of leadership in conservation and education. So I am going to talk about conservation above the clouds, saving pheasants, snow leopards, and red pandas. So as Jeff mentioned about the book, The Birds of Nepal in Nepali version, and that is at that time I was just graduated, and that was in our hand first time I think in 2007, the Nepalese version. And that has huge impact on the Nepalese guides, nature guides. And I also distributed that books to different awareness program on birds. So here, so I like to talk more about, talk more about, first of all, we are so far away from here. So it's the nearly 8,000 miles away. And we are in between very small country and in between China and India. And, if you see the altitude there, it begins from nearly 60 meters to all the way to top of the Mount Everest. So that's why Nepal has a very diverse biodiversity, high biodiversity, considering different climates, and due to that, so we have 902 species of wild birds so far recorded, and 212 species of mammals, and 692 species of the birds, and 6,500 plants species, flowering plants. And this all because, this is making me confusion, rather I go with this. This is all because Nepal is meeting points of Palearctic and Oriental climates, so that's why we have different types of climates, from tropical to the alpine and tundra. So if you see, on the southern part, border to India, so we have a very good habitat for the Royal Bengal tiger. So currently we have nearly 400 tigers and nearly 1,000 rhino, 100 greater rhinoceros, and from that all the way to within the 200 kilometer of average width. So the altitude changes so rapidly, and there are many valleys and microclimates that giving a different types of environment, creating such a diverse, high biodiversity. And so actually in Nepal, the conservation begins around 1960s, all because after the hunting by the former royal family and their friends from the Britons. And then that time, hundreds of rhinos were killed, hunted, and hundreds of tigers were killed. And then population crashed, and they realized that, we should establish the protected areas. So national park were established there. Then in 1973, we established first national park that is now UNESCO World Heritage Site, where nearly 752 rhinos are thriving there, and the tigers there. So this is really a good protected areas. And even people are sometimes amazed by the seeing rhino on the street nearby. So some rhino are really friendly to people there. It is more like armor rhino, and it is smaller than white rhino and larger than the black rhino. And then we have, all together now we have 21 protected areas, and this actually the protected areas covers 23.4% of the country land within the conservation area. Very fertile land are within the conservation has been established as the national park, and now the conservation, there are more people participatory, so that's why we are really becoming successful in conservation, because local people really helping participating in conservation. So that's why now from the protected areas to we are now going with the landscape level conservation. So there are different landscape now, considering the movement of the birds, tigers and leopards. So that's how the conservation is happening in Nepal. And then talking about the organization BIOCOS Nepal, so we are actually focusing on the central part of the Himalaya in that region, Annapurna region, and this is more like the border of Eastern Himalaya and the Western Himalayas. So Eastern Himalayas are more wetter than the Western Himalaya. So we are working on the border because that's why it's quite benefiting that area, because we have the species from the Western Himalaya as well as the Eastern Himalaya. So that is quite biologically significant area. And here actually we started a program with the Toledo Zoo from this year. And then we have already created baseline there. So considering the area, these are the unique species: the musk deer, snow leopard, chair pheasants, red panda, Himalayan black bear, clouded leopard, and common leopards. These are the species in this region. And then we also are working for pheasants, focusing on pheasants, and more on the Peeper pheasant conservation landscape. That is landscape actually created this year with the local municipality. So municipality, and we are working on these regions on pheasant conservation. And this region is really good habitat for clouded leopard and Himalayan black bear and Himalayan serow. So these are some vulnerable species in IUCN category. And these are the area is really important because of the pheasant species. So so 6 pheasants species out of 10, out of 8 species that are found in Nepal actually thriving there. So that's why this area is very important, and we are focusing on the pheasants but conserving other animals there, like clouded leopards and Himalayan black bear. So this area is really good one. And then we have a program that is snow leopard stewardship program. We started that program from that the pink one, the middle one, as a pilot project, and then later we extended that to the both sides of the area. And currently we are working with the Toledo Zoo on this blue region, and we cover this whole area because of the requirement of these snow leopards. So they need a large rare area. So that's why we are covering these 3 valleys. And these all 3 valleys actually on the back of the mountain, 3 mountain. So it's like 7th tallest and 7th, 8th, and 10th tallest mountain in that region. But easily accessible. So we can go there. So back up the mountain, drive through the river valley. And these are the areas. So the Mustang region. So we are working with Toledo Zoo, that the program, that is the Dhaulagiri mountain. And so that's why we named that program as a Round Dhaulagiri Conservation Program. And within that program, I will talk about that program on my following slides. And so how we are working on this stewardship, snow leopard conservation stewardship program. So we are monitoring snow leopard using camera traps in regular basis. And the prey species are these big horned sheep. You can see that. That is the blue sheep actually. And then we are working with the herders. So the herders are the one living in snow leopard's habitat. So that's why we are actually more focused on involving herders in our program. So that's why we support them constructing predator-proof corrals for the goats and calves of yak. So that's how we are working, and at the same time we are encouraging them to build predator-proof corrals. So these are the some footages of snow leopard captured on camera traps. So in this area we have actually 12 to 16 snow leopard has been recorded in our camera traps. And other thing, it should be actually the all capital smart, so spatial monitoring and reporting tools that we are using on the mobile apps, that is the mobile apps, and then we have selected scouts. So local people are employed as scouts, and they are trained on using that apps and record the animals that they are actually they actually encounter. So that's how we can know how we are covering the habitats of snow leopard and other prey species. And this is the actually this program actually helping to monitor retaliatory killing. So actually retaliatory killing is quite high on the snow leopard region. So other species that we are focusing with red panda, and that is on the eastern Himalaya within the Everest region. So that point is actually on the same valley where Everest is, and Mount Everest is, and the other region is the Dhorpatang hunting reserve, where we are actually laying a foundation for red panda conservation with the Toledo Zoo. And so this is how we are working with the Toledo Zoo on the red panda conservation. So overall, we like to, the BIOCOS is a bridging between community and the protected areas. So in our assessment, what we found that in Dorpatan Hunting Reserve, where red pandas are, actually the protected area authority have a huge gap with the local people. So they always like to enforce laws and power, but local people don't like that. So that's why there is a huge gap. And so they are not listening the park authorities for the conservation. So that's why we actually bridging that gap between community and the park. So we are awareing local peoples about the value of the wildlife they have. And so slowly people are, more participating on conservation. And then with the help of the Toledo Zoo, so scouts are, local people are actually taken as, employed as scouts. And they are actually monitoring their area. So involving local people on forest patrolling, and then this actually helping our direct involvement of communities. That's how we are working. So monitoring, research and monitoring, and the conservation and education program and community-led conservation program. That is more by training the local people. So this is our recent research data, that I have plotted here. So we did a thorough assessment of red panda. Where are they actually? Where should we focus on the conservation program? So that's why we have now figured out we should focus on the Dorpatan Hunting Reserve and around that areas. And so that program we're gonna implement on that region close by the Dhaulagiri mountain. And this is the red panda real habitat. You can see the mountain on the background. That's the Dhaulagiri mountain, and this is actually the latrine site on the tree. Most of the time, red panda establish the latrine site on the tree. They select a very good tree. It's a very like old tree that is actually within the forest. So that's why red panda likes very close canopy, undergrowth of the bamboo, and where water source is close by. And this is our so camera trap image that we capture this April, and the population there is, we have estimated 6 individuals at least in that forest. And so considering the big area, so we're gonna conserve more than 20 red pandas there at least. So we're gonna work on that area as well. And now, in the program that I talked about, Round Dhaulagiri Conservation Program, so BIOCOS and the Nepalese Ornithological Union is working with Toledo Zoo. So here I am going to present, the update from Nepalese Ornithological Union, and the representative from the Nepalese Ornithological Union could not come here because of the visa issues. And then I am actually presenting their updates. So with the Nepalese Ornithological Union, so we are the focus is the chair pheasants. This is the bird they are focusing on. So within that Round Dhaulagiri Conservation Program, and mainly, what we are doing there is estimate the population status of these birds based on the call count survey. And then plan is to establish long-term pheasants monitoring listening station, and at the same time local people are trained on the monitoring. And this is the area. Recently this year surveys has been done in the area nearby. So that is also within the area that I talked about around the Dhaulagiri Conservation Program. So there are permanent calling station has been established, and these station will be used to monitor population of these birds. And if we see here, the bird is doing really good. The population is stable. So in 2004. The sample population is 17, and recently this year they have actually counted 18 birds from these 7 stations, calling stations. So another thing that is being done is workshop and training. So people are trained on the bird watching, and educating them on the bird conservation. And most of the Nepalese curriculum, they actually have the biodiversity conservation within the curricula, school curriculum, but the practical knowledge, the field knowledge is really not that good. So that's why this training actually helping school kids to know about birds and other wildlife, as well as teachers are also included in the workshop. And so teachers are also trained on the biodiversity, so that's how they can teach their kids on the biodiversity conservation. And this is how actually kids are involving and on the field site. And this year, the NOU and we actually NOU and with the support of Toledo Zoo. So these 2 guys are local scouts, and they are now gonna monitor the birds and other wildlife regularly on that area. And the bird survey is going there. Baseline bird survey has done on this Dorpatan hunting reserve this year. And this is really beautiful area, and in front of the mountain and back of the mountain. So it is like more southwest part of the mountain, and on the north side we are working on snow leopard. So that's why we have named that program as around the Dhaulagiri Conservation Program, and included 3 species. So chair pheasants, red panda, and snow leopard. So Toledo Zoo, BIOCOS, and NOU are working together on this area. And this area is one of the area that is actually overlooked for the research and conservation by the the government. And then on the bird survey, they have recorded 5,232 individual. It looks like they are very precise on the number they have counted this year, and the total 160 species of pheasants. Species of the birds. And talking about snow leopard stewardship program, I mentioned already. So more about it's all about the research and monitoring, supporting herders and community engagement through the different activities, and conservation awareness through sports, scout and mobilization, and smart anti-poaching patrol, and snow leopard tourism. When we talked about tourism, when local people see the values, and they actually like to involve themselves on the conservation program. So that's why we are actually encouraging bird watching tourism, snow leopard based, the conservation tourism. So that's how we are encouraging people on participating in conservation. So basically, when they think about there is some value on the species they have, and they're gonna show more interest in conservation. So this is the area actually we are working with the Toledo Zoo. So this is the whole landscape. And this year, in this pink area and blue area, we are working on. And so Manang is that area where 10 scouts for smart patrolling has been employed, and then camera trapping is happening there, prey species count happening last year. And we also doing the friendship match for conservation, football for elk and snow leopard. So that's we have been doing since 2023. And then at the same time, we are encouraging herders to apply for the compensation relief. Most of the time, herder feels very hassles while filling the compensation and claiming the compensation to the government because of the too many documents. So that's why we are helping them. And because of this football program, actually, government is more sensitized, because this program actually, the football program involved national players, Nepalese celebrities, singers, and that's how they play with the local yak team. So local youths are on the yak team. So this sports actually involving many tires of the local people as well as from the national level. And due to this, due to this. The government is very concerned, very focused on providing the compensation relief to the local herders. So so this is the pheasants area, the Pepper pheasant landscape where we are working for the pheasant conservation. And so how to play this video? Can you play from there? So this is actually recently done. It's done on October 11th, Saturday. And this is very preliminary video that actually So with the to promote, to encourage the tourism on snow leopard, then we are supporting local entrepreneurs technically. So BIOCOS is monitoring snow leopard in the other region, the Manang Valley, and there is a snow leopard haven is created. And that is more about the mission of the haven is to support protection of snow leopards by enhancing local people participations while offering a chance to witness its wonders. So stay in the snow leopard territory, learn about this apex predator through guided conservation talks, and contribute to community-led conservation. That is the mission of the snow leopard haven. And here, I think we need to play that video again. That one. That's from the Mustang region where we are working with the Toledo Zoo. The other one, the close photograph, videograph, and this is from close by the snow leopard haven. So we have already employed 2 scouts in the region where we are working with Toledo Zoo, and so we are patrolling regularly these areas, and we are counting prey species next month on November when they come down. And then other program is going on. So we have already distributed the field gears to the herders. So that's it's more like rapid building programs with the herders. And talking about the outputs of the program, so in a year we have already laid the foundation for red panda conservation with the Toledo Zoo. So we have fixed the area where we have to work for red panda conservation in and close by the Dorpadan hunting reserve. And then the pilot snow leopard stewardship program has been actually extended to the Mustang Valley, the west, that is the west part of that landscape that I shown on the map. So that's how we like to cover that 4,000 square kilometer area on the back of the Himalaya for snow leopard conservation. And so most of the time, only the conservationists are talking about conservation. So that's why the major output of this whole, the sports and our involvement and our program and employing scouts, they are actually helping to collaborate with the different tiers of organization, different kinds of organization. That's how we are. That's the output of this program. It is growing more. It is actually participating, involving more organization, more people in the conservation of snow leopard. And then the bird that cheer pheasants is in its natural habitat has been monitoring and effectively going on. So finally, thank you all of you for listening, and I am very much thankful to Jeff and Joe and to give me such a great opportunity to share about Nepal and conservation there. And I like to thank Toledo Zoo supporting those very rare and rare species for conservation in the fragile Himalayas environment. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Singh. We're going to take a short break. If everybody can be back here by 11, that would be great. And we'll be hearing about hippo work in Zimbabwe. So thank you. Okay, welcome back. Get folks to migrate back in here. Our next presenter, Dr. Lochran Traill, is doing some amazing research with human-wildlife conflict with hippos in Zimbabwe. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Lochran Traill.
Thank you. Hi, good day, everyone. So my name's Lochran. I work at the University of Leeds in the United Kingdom. I grew up in Zimbabwe and haven't lived there for over 20 years, but I'm now finding a way of going back to Zimbabwe and doing some work there. The research that I do is on large herbivores, and I've taken some interest in hippo recently for a number of reasons. And today's talk will be split into two parts. I'll talk about wildlife conflict, and then I'll talk about a project that I'm working on at the moment that's partly funded through Toledo Zoo. So I'll just talk about what wildlife conflict is, and then what conflict between humans and hippo is. It's difficult for me to know the audience, so some of this you may be very familiar with, but some of the things that I talk about here, people may not be familiar with, so I'll go through these. These are fairly standard dictionary definitions of wildlife conflict. And, well, not quite dictionary, but from IUCN and then a published paper. But basically, human wildlife conflict arises when animals pose a direct threat to the livelihood and safety of humans. And then, as a consequence of that, there may be persecution of those species. This IUCN definition, a more scientific definition is this: when the behavior of non-pest wild species poses direct and recurring threats, so that's important, to livelihood and safety of people, community, then there may be persecution of those species. It's of concern to conservationists because or it's highly topical because it tears us between our duty towards humanity, common humanity, but also our concerns and our duty towards conservation of wild animal populations. So there's various manifestations of conflict. Conflict with people and wildlife may manifest, of course, as injury or death to people, but also damage to infrastructure. This is, damaged infrastructure. Sorry. All right, green button, that button. Damaged infrastructure. This is damage to property in Africa, well, maybe Asia, through elephant. So property and infrastructure. So this feeds into livelihoods. This is damage. This actually happens a lot in Africa with elephant during the dry season. They may dig up water, damage water pipes. And then, of course, the radiant of crops. So that's a negative outcome for the livelihoods of people. And then this doesn't illustrate an animal being killed, but an animal being chased away. But, of course, one outcome of conflict is that people are exhausted by it, and they're not tolerant of those wild animals, and they will injure them or kill them. So that's human-wildlife conflict broadly, and then human-hippo conflict is basically when hippos pose a threat to human lives and livelihoods, and as a consequence of that, there may be retributive killing of those animals. These images are from South Africa. This is a place called St. Lucia in South Africa where they broadly tolerate it, actually. It's a town out next to wetlands, and they tolerate it, and they actually just move through, even though they're wild, move through the town, but people don't go too close to them. And this is a rugby field, rugby union, which is popular in South Africa, and this is nearby Kruger National Park. And hippo are doing what they do at night, and that's graze. So these are quite common sights in some parts of Africa, but in other areas, in many parts of Africa actually, where people are subsistence farmers and they live alongside wildlife, then they may not coexist as peacefully with hippopotamus as in areas like St. Lucia. So quite a lot of text here. I'm a lecturer, and all the time I teach students to reduce the amount of text in their slides, and then I've done exactly the opposite, but none of those students are here, so it's okay. So Conflict with hippo mostly occurs within 1,000 meters of water, and that's because hippo are interesting animals. They need to stay in the water during the daytime, and then they need to forage outside of the water during the nighttime. And they can go up to 10 kilometers, but they generally stay within 1,000 meters from water. And so the conflict mostly occurs within that area. Conflict with people occurs on land, but also in the water, actually. So with fishers and then farmers on land and then also in the water. Mostly with a conflict with subsistence level farmers and fishers, but also there is conflict with people that run tourist lodges. Hippo will kill people, including high fee paying tourists. And there is conflict also with commercial farmers. But that's typically in southern Africa, across much of Africa where there are subsistence farmers. Hippo will come into conflict with those people. So they can kill or injure people. They can damage crops. They can also compete with livestock because they are bulk grazers. They will graze up to 40 to 50 kilos of forage, grass in an evening. And so they compete with livestock for forage. That's generally overlooked. They sometimes kill livestock, cows or goats. They damage infrastructure, but they also damage boats and fishing gear, like nets, for example. And it's an ongoing and increasing issue as human populations increase in sub-Saharan Africa. Hippo are interesting. There's a paper that I wrote over here with a previous student of mine, a synthesis of human-hippo conflict. And we actually sourced a medical paper that documented a team of medical doctors that documented people that reported with injuries from hippo. And what they actually documented was that it's a form of trauma, not biting injury or biting death. And that is because hippo have such big mouths and such incredibly strong bite force that what they inflict on people when they bite them is a crushing trauma, substantial damage to their internal organs. And it's not entirely true if you hear people say that hippo kill more people than any other animal in Africa. That's not actually true. Depends on the area. In some places, people are more killed by elephant or by lion, for example. But what is true is that if you ever do encounter a hippo in Africa, and you can't outrun it, and pretty much none of us can outrun hippo, and if you are attacked by that hippo, the likelihood of mortality, unfortunately, is high, greater than a 50% chance. So it's not likely you're going to make that. So these are data over here that have been estimated, and the likelihood of mortality really is between 55 and 87%, and that's because of the crushing trauma of the bite that hippo impose on the human body. But if you do survive, then you may lose a limb or certainly be substantially disabled. Anyways, one point that I make is for people that are poor people living in rural areas, if they do survive, it's obviously not desirable if they are substantially injured because they need to farm, and it can have serious consequences to them and their families, actually. So people avoid hippo and take conflict with hippo very seriously. So injuries can occur on land. Typically at nighttime, hippos come out at nighttime routinely. And most deaths, they're not malicious animals, they won't hunt down people, but most deaths occur where people bump into hippo at night and the hippo feel threatened, particularly if they're between the water and the person, and they will attack that person and then head straight back to the water. They can attack if they're provoked, if people throw things at them, if they're trying to protect their crops. And then attacks do happen in the water, typically where females may be protective of their young. A lot of text again, but I just wanted to illustrate principally over here. These are the crops that they may forage on. at night. They're not fussy eaters at all. As long as somebody else is growing those crops, they're more than happy to feed on these. So a lot of different crops that they will forage on. And most of the complaints that villagers may make will pertain to crop damage, not so much boat damage or fishing gear damage, mostly crop damage. Of course, the animals are herbivores. And they do also just damage the crops by walking through those crops. And then a paper over here documented what it may cost people per hectare, the cost of the damage, and that doesn't seem a lot in the United States, but for people, very poor people who may be earning a couple of US dollars a day, that's a substantial loss. They also compete with grazers for graze, so livestock, and they also are disease vectors, in particular anthrax. So then retributive killing, so I've covered how hippo may affect human life, human livelihoods, through crop damage and loss of income. But then, of course, people may then decide to kill those hippo or injure those hippo. And hippo are actually quite easy to kill in the wild, and that is because they're restricted to the water during the daytime. So fresh water, they live in the fresh water, of course, the rivers and dams, if those are there, but mostly river systems. And then they come out at night. So they're actually quite easy to find and actually quite easy to kill for people who may have access to rifles. And that is because they have to breathe. They might go below the surface of the water, but then they'll come up again. And I say that they're easy relative to other animals like predators or elephants that may disperse after killing livestock or damaging crops and actually go quite far. And there's actually, the kill ratio has actually been documented, so 2.7 hippo are documented to be killed, higher than any other wild animals, for every human that is injured or lost. And that's data from Mozambique, mortality, human wildlife conflict for data from Mozambique. So it doesn't surprise me because people know where those hippo are during the daytime. Conflict does have a very negative outcome for both people and for hippo. And these are some further data around the number of hippo that have been killed through retributive or by the game department responding to complaints by people. And they can also be poisoned, actually. This is a map, or these are a few maps from a well-known paper from 2015. And they talked about range contractions, decline of large herbivore species. So this is the range of hippo in the past, and the red, so the blue and then the red denotes the present day range, more or less. And that's, of course, not entirely to retributive killing through wildlife conflict, but also habitat loss and illegal killing for meat and for ivory to some extent. But wildlife conflict and retributive killing of animals through conflict is a concern, and it has been one reason why hippo have retracted. Their populations are fairly stable, actually, but at the moment, but it's quite likely that they're going to lose more of their range and populations will decline going forward. So these images taken from a very good PhD that actually hasn't been published in the peer-reviewed literature outside of the PhD itself by an LA Post, and you can source their PhD if you're interested. I have a reference list at the end of the slides here. And what she's done over here is provide some useful images of how people will try and mitigate conflict. This is in East Africa with hippo, so not very effective fences over there that hippo will just easily push through those, but they try and erect barriers. These are methods that people use to mitigate conflict. Trenches are quite effective, fences and so on. But people also occupy watch houses at night time, where they'll sleep amongst their crops and listen for elephant or hippo and try and chase them away. And again, more text, but this is a table taken from a paper on the methods used to mitigate against conflict or encourage coexistence with hippo. And there are a number of different ways, so direct and indirect approaches. So direct approaches, of course, could be the most obvious being lethal removal, and sometimes wildlife officials may do that where hippo are very much problematic. That's just basically shooting them out. Then it may also include non-lethal removal, translocation or sterilization, but that's very difficult. They're incredibly difficult animals to catch during the daytime or immobilize because they take to the water, but once they are immobilized, they actually sink. All those vets are doing work now to prevent that. So when they're immobilized, they don't sink. But anyways, they're very difficult to catch, actually. And they're very big and very dangerous, as you'll see when you go see the hippo today, if you haven't seen them already. So they're difficult to catch. And then ways of mitigating conflict, too, are just building barriers around crops. So probably the most effective method is a cable of about 80 centimeters above the ground, as long as that's a strong cable that prevents hippo from getting to crops, and that's because they have short legs and they can't step over anything above 80 centimeters. So funny enough, it seems to me that that's the most effective way of preventing hippo from raiding crops at the moment. And then people also, not a lot of work has been done here, but people may stay out in the crops at night, and then they may flash lights, they'll build fires, and they'll have sound machines or bang bells and so on to chase hippos away. And there's also potential for work around chemical repellents, like has been done for elephants, so chili peppers, for example, and that hasn't been widely tested. And these oftentimes can be used in combination. The reason why I highlight this is I'll be talking briefly about some of the work that we're doing at the moment around audio playback. And then indirect ways of encouraging coexistence or mitigating conflict may be things that you're familiar with, like community-based conservation effort, and I guess also compensation. So compensation doesn't always work. It varies across countries. Some governments pay compensations, others don't. The compensation that government officials may pay for damage to crops is typically less than the value of the crops themselves. And one issue with compensation too is it may encourage exaggeration. It's easy for people to exaggerate crop damage by elephant or hippo because you can see their spoil, but for small mammals, for example, that do substantial damage to crops, it's more difficult to prove. So conservation payments may be one way, and that includes payment for ecosystem services. Hippo do contribute substantially to the ecosystem that they live in by taking forage from the land and then depositing that nutrient in the water through fecal content during the daytime, and they play a substantial role in freshwater ecology. But payment for ecosystem services is dependent on money availability and may not be reliable at all. And then income generation through tourism, that's where communities may be encouraged to generate income, which has been done in Zimbabwe through tourism, photographic tourism, and sports hunting to a lesser extent. Hippo are not perceived as charismatic as well-known species that people want to go see, part of the big five, so lion and elephant, but they certainly are rated quite highly by tourists, so they do attract tourists. And then just very briefly, some of the things that I've outlined here are devolution. That's been done in Zimbabwe, where communities themselves have the right to make the decisions around how they can earn income from wildlife populations, and that tends to stop them from poaching, and they become more tolerant. And then also outreach and education. So some of the tools that people may use to repel hippo from the crops are over here. So lighting fires, so lights, form of lighting, sound machines that play back, but that means that people stay in those crops and then they play the sound machines. Hippo may then run away, scarecrows, and then strips of metal that may dangle in the wind, but also people may bang on those to scare the hippo away. And then sling stones and so on. But all of this necessitates people staying out at night and guarding those crops, and that puts them in danger. Obviously, the other thing actually that's overlooked is it necessitates people, maybe adults who are breadwinners or children, staying out, not getting much sleep, and that affects their schooling the next day if they're children, or if they're adults, their effectiveness at doing their job the next day, and of course it puts them in danger. So while I was thinking about this and thinking about what opportunities there are to mitigate conflict with hippo, based on what's known, there hasn't been much done around testing of the different tools and mitigating conflict. So while I was thinking about all this, I read a paper published by a bunch of academics, including a Dutch team of engineers and computer scientists, and they have developed an approach that uses AI-enabled cameras to, in this case, detect elephant and alert authorities to the presence of those elephant in an area where they're not meant to be. So I contacted them, and we put together a project, and then secured some funding from Toledo Zoo, and then also some funding from the university that I work at. And so we're actually testing it this right now at the moment. Actually, we've just put the equipment out a month ago. So this is Zimbabwe. Again, I always teach students that if they show a map, they need to have an inset to show where that country is within the continent. And so I've done the things that I told them not to do. But it's obviously in the southeastern part of Zimbabwe, South Africa, Mozambique, Botswana, Harare, and then there's a really nice national park down in the southeastern part of Zimbabwe, Gonavazo National Park. There's hippo that live there. This is the Rundi River in the national park. There are hippo that live in the deeper parts of that river, and there's a hippo trail that comes out of the water over here, comes up in the land. They tend to use the same slipways and trails every night where they come out of the water and come up on land and then go and forage at night, and then they go back into the water during the daytime. So I was there earlier in the year and set up these off-the-shelf commercial cameras that you can buy here. Just spy point cameras, I think was the brand, LTA Acorn. But anyways, I set up some camera traps just to see if hippo were actually using the trails across a few different sites. And what you have to contest with, of course, in a national park are some mischievous and some malicious animals. The mischievous animals have been over here. This is not a selfie. It was looking at the camera trap. You can see some elephant in the background over there. It's a really neat photo. But they do damage equipment, but not this baboon. But elephant, if they find anything that smells like a human, that's the end of that equipment. And this is in order of sequence that it didn't take a video. This is a big old bull walking along, sees the camera trap, has a closer look, an even closer look, and that's the end of the camera trap. On the ground, I think I only got about 10 days of data just before that happened. But anyways, we did see that hippo were using that trail, and so went back out recently to put in place the AI-enabled cameras. And what we did, you can't see too well, but the AI-enabled cameras are over there. But then what we did is, this is quite common actually, putting rocks around trees actually to stop damage being done by elephant to trees that are being wiped out in areas like where elephant are, where the elephant populations are very healthy and there's lots of elephant, like baobab, for example. There's a number of papers that you can read around the damage that the elephant do to baobab trees or marula trees in southern Africa. And one way of mitigating against that is to put a bunch of rocks around the trees with the sharp ends of the rocks up, because remarkably, it seems that they have sensitive feet, and they don't like stepping on those rocks. So anyways, there we go. We put these out to protect the equipment. So a little bit of an anticlimax, because I'm not going to go into too much detail because some of this technology is quite novel. So I'm working on the paper now, but that will be publicly available, I guess, in around 6 months or so. But what I'm doing with the team of engineers is we have AI-enabled cameras that are set up, but we also have a repeller system that has been set up, which is technologically quite novel, and that's a way of having an audio playback that would deter those animals from that area once the animals have been detected. But anyways, these are images that have come from the field site. So mostly this camera over here, and then there's a further camera down there. The experimental design that I set up is a couple of AI-enabled cameras, and then just off-the-shelf cameras set up further down, and those are controls. So we're going to look at the frequency of use of those trails by Hippo in areas where we have the repeller systems and then the non-repeller systems. So these are some images that have been sent. So the engineers that I work with set up a LoRa-based LoRaWAN that communicates with the AI-enabled cameras, and then the base station, the LoRaWAN base station that we set up on this communication tower at headquarters at the camp, then is configured to Iridium, and so you can actually get the images pretty much 10 to 15 minutes after the image has been taken in this remote area. And you can see the animals that are using. These are waterbuck, very beautiful antelope, using these sites, accessing these sites. Elephant, wanting to damage the equipment, but not quite being able to damage the equipment. And then a hippo, and the machine learning has quickly identified. So the AI, through learning, through training of the models, has correctly identified hippos. So that's a true positive, I think, is the terminology. And this is a true negative, as far as I know, is the terminology. So these images have been taken, been processed on the computers, the mini computer on site, and sending us these data. And these can easily, this system can easily be configured to send people text messages or emails or text messages to tell them that there's an animal that in an area where they shouldn't be. But we also take it a little bit further, and that's something that we writing a paper on right now. The usefulness, of course, of this is that, and what I indicated with showing you pictures of people that, little huts that people would have to occupy at night to stay out at, and chase hippo or elephant away from their crops, is that if we work towards AI-enabled technology, that means that people don't have to stay out there. They can have a fairly decent night's sleep, and they are relatively safe. So an early warning system would mean that people would have to go out and chase those animals away, but if you configure that system to audio or light repellers, and then you can create a landscape of fear in those crop areas, and that would deter those animals from using those crops potentially. The technology is pretty fragile right now, and there's a number of issues, a number of things that we've had to deal with. But what I like to say to people is that when I was a student, quite a long time ago, I didn't have a mobile phone or cell phone, I think you call them here. And then I got a great big cell phone, and now everybody has a cell phone. Everyone has a smartphone in Zimbabwe. Right across Zimbabwe, we only the elite in the past, when I was younger, would have access to phones. Everybody has access to that technology right across the country. And so I do think that in 15, 20 years from now, this technology will be cheaper, more robust, more efficient, and you will have this technology rolled out across landscapes, and people can sleep more peacefully at night and let the machines chase the animals away. Well, thank you very much. Sorry, and thank you, of course, to all of these people, including Toledo Zoo, and all the people that have been very helpful to this project.
Thank you. Next up, we have two Toledo Zoo staff members, Coral Stoddard and Suzanne Husband. They'll be talking about saving a critically endangered monkey in the urban environment with our pied tamarins. Let's see where they ran off to. Here they are.
Hello. Koral and I are going to kind of tag team this. When Jeff originally suggested that we get pied tamarins in our collection, it was kind of fun to go down a rabbit hole and learn all you could about them, and I got really excited about the program. But we have two sides to it that as he was saying, they're critically endangered in the wild and definitely a conservation animal that we want to work with. And then on top of that, the population in North America was crashing. It got down to 21 animals at 9 zoos at one point. And get my button right. I'm going to talk a little bit on our program and what's happening with them, and then Koral will do the conservation side of how we're helping in the wild. When we originally asked to get them in, there were only 9 zoos that had those animals, and we ended up with 2 pair at Toledo in 2020. And we were lucky enough that we actually had breeding in that first year that we worked with the program and got a pair to breed. And that pair continued to breed for us and did well. And then we brought in more pairs and moved our animals around some. And altogether, I've had 19 born at the zoo now. And they're spread out. You'll see the ones that are on exhibit are we have 6 that are in the main exhibit, and then we also have groupings in the back that we have. Right now we actually have a pair with ones that were born just a few months ago that we have in the back as well. So it's kind of exciting with it. One of the things I really want to point out with our program that I'm really proud of is one of the reasons they were diminishing in zoos is I think they got very static, that they're listed as one of the most challenging to work with, and they have challenges to them. We were excited to have an animal that we could work with that had a few more things we had to do with them. But because of that, they had very strict rules, and I think everyone was following those rules to a T, that it was actually causing more problems than it was worth. So when we got them in, we looked at our situation and what was going on with them, and we developed our own program. We kind of thought outside the box on a lot of it, and we were doing things that no others had done in a while, and it worked. They're listed as very stressed animals, territorial, they can have specific health issues, and we really deep dived on their diet and changed their diet. We have a diet that is not the one that's recommended in the manual. We've worked it and tweaked it. And we go in with our animals and find ways to mitigate the stress issues that they have. And so now we have animals that are supposed to not want us in their exhibit that actually come up and use the keepers as bridges as they go through the exhibit and everything, and are so comfortable. They can move back if they want to. We intentionally did exhibits where we gave them places to escape to, but they're so comfortable they're actually coming down to us. And so with our program, I really feel that we're successful because we've looked at that and mitigated it, and we're continuing to figure out ways to, we have one of the healthiest populations, both socially and physically, that we just don't have the health problems that they listed that we should be looking for with these guys. We look for it, we just don't have it here. So I'm really proud of that program with it. And then, maybe, in 2022, the SSP then decided to actually phase out the program, and it's no longer listed as a national program. There just weren't enough animals to make it worthwhile to have the AZA back it. So Toledo Zoo offered to take over the program, and we actually have become the independent program person, and we work with the other zoos that still had them. And then I'm now the actual program manager for the North American population. And in the very first year, I had to make a couple of changes right off the bat because they lost some animals and I needed to move some around. so we didn't have solitary animals. And that produced one more breeding pair. But overall, it was mainly us that were still breeding at that point. We weren't getting a lot of breeding out of the other zoos. So the zoo sponsored us to actually do a genetic survey of the animals and do a new breeding rec for that went into 23, 24. And in 24, we only had 6 zoos left, and 5 out of the 6 we made recommendations to mix all their animals around, and we mixed them to different places. And now we actually have 7 pairs that are breeding and have been successful after that, and we're pushing 50 animals now in the collection. And we've added one more zoo has taken it on. We have another one that's coming on that we've identified animals that we're going to send to them. And we have 2 more zoos that are going to join the program next year. So we're starting to get more zoos involved. And somewhere on here, I think I had it, we ended up having, I just got emails this week. We have 4 confirmed pregnant females in the collection. And we have 1 more that is suspected. So next year we should have another boon of births. And I feel like the program at this point is finally stabilized for us. And then we're also working with mainly Brazil to bring in new individuals to the program to get the genetic diversity up. Obviously, when you drop down to 20 animals, there's not a lot of genetic diversity there. And so we want to get it back up again so that we can push this program into the future and keep it running from there. And then the other side of our program is what we're doing with them in the wild. They are the most critically endangered of the tamarin species, and they just got added to and it's not something you want, but they got added to the top 25 most endangered primates in the world because they have a very tiny range, like Jeff was saying, that is only one little spot in Brazil. And it's in the city of Manaus. And I always say it's in the city of Manaus, but actually they were there and Manaus built up around them. It's a port city right on the Amazon, and it's very thriving with that, so they continue to expand out with it. And unfortunately, what happens is they fragmented their forests so much that they can't naturally get from one tree to another to get to new food sources or to each other. These guys never come down to the ground if they don't have to. They travel totally through the trees. And when you have this kind of a setup, you can't get from one tree to another. So unfortunately, they use the electrical lines and get electrocuted, or they come down to the ground and try to get across, and they're being hit by cars. They're being attacked by dogs, cats, any predators on the ground. Or they end up getting caught by people and put into a pet trade thing. They end up having pets in their backyard. So it's really diminished the population on it. And I'm going to have Koral take over. All of that sounds sad. We actually have some good news there that we have hope for them.
Hello. So we recently got the opportunity to travel to Manaus last November, and we were able to meet with the people that we have been helping to fund with these conservation programs. And with these programs, we're helping in a dual stage here with 2 very important aspects of conservation for the species. Is it the green? Yeah. So as Suzanne was saying, the biggest issue with these guys is how they get around. Fragmentation of forest is an ongoing issue with a lot of species in every different country, and it's no different in Manaus. And mainly what they're using right now are these electrical lines, and that's every other primate species in the area as well is having the same issue. But with these little guys, what they are working towards and what we have at the Toledo Zoo are helping to fund are these bridges that you see here in this photo. So the other issue that they're having is the deforestation that we were able to get, I would say, really wonderful footage of, but wonderful footage of a disastrous view. So we are working with Marcelo Gordo. He works at the university, and he has this dual sight of how to help this species. And what you're seeing in this photo is he was giving us a tour of his greenhouse. That's something that we are funding, that he is actually growing plants specific to the pied tamarins. So it's not just kind of willy-nilly planting things out there and seeing what will take. He's actually looking at what plants are going to help this species to be able to survive better out in their natural environment. So, and one of the biggest reasons why this species is so important, we always get asked that, why? Why are we helping the species? What's the reason? One of the biggest things that these guys are so helpful for in the forest where they're native to is that they are seed dispersers, and they will go from, they're one of very few species that will go from a primary forest into a secondary forest and to help to bring that forest back. So this is Marcelo's greenhouse, where he has a ton of different plants, and what he's doing is taking these plants out and putting in new plants to bring back the forest for these animals to be able to survive better in. And then these bridges, we have a video here. Corey, if you can help me out. Actually, yeah, this guy. You're right, you have to go to the next one. This is the video. So if you look, these bridges are wonderfully used by multiple species, but if you watch, we have footage of our little guys here using their bridges. This is a little group of pied tamarins. And if you look closely in this image, you're going to see the power lines down below them. So with the usage of this bridge, they're able to stay off those power lines. And the other thing that you're not able to see in this video is that below this bridge is a road. So they're also able to stay off the roads and stay safe. Oh, I can play it too, Corey. Switch. So another thing that we have recently done to help Marcelo with his plant distribution is we just bought a vehicle for him and his constituents to be able to use to take plants out and to get them dispersed around where they need to be. And then we wanted to show you a photo of another big issue that we have with doing any sort of conservation is locating and finding animals, and to be able to actually do this research on them. So here's your test for the day. I'll give you a second. Find the tiny tamarin. And I'm gonna help you in 3, 2, 1. There he is. So with these guys, they're such a small, exciting, charismatic species, but they're still very difficult to locate when they're out trying to work with these animals and to do the research with them. And Suzanne's gonna take back over some info for you for where we're looking to go with our program in the future.
I'll just stand here for it. On a lot of it, we're going to continue to work with this program. They're also looking at expanding and making, one of the things we did while we were in Brazil, like they were saying, is we went to a workshop and helped the people that are rescuing them, teaching them how to care for them and to get them healthy enough to get back into the wild. And what they decided at that workshop is they really need a facility that's specifically for not just tamarins, but primate, so they can train staff in for that. And so what we're looking at is we're going to end up helping them in the future with that as well, of getting them really specialized. Right now, the group we worked with everything. So whatever they rescued, so they could have jaguars, they could have primates, they could have birds, they could have tortoises. So it was very hard for them to specialize in caring for them. So we're helping with that as well. And again, if we keep going with getting the North American population going, that part of that is just educating you so that you want to save them with us. But it's also, we want them to be able to do the same kind of care there and get them back into the wild. It doesn't help to just rescue them and pull them from the wild. We need to make sure we can get them back. So we're going to continue doing that in the future as well.
And then one final note we would like to share with you. When we traveled to Brazil, we brought along our 2 fantastic cinematographers, our communication department, Corey and Caitlin, and they were able to take a ton of wonderful footage, and they put together a mini documentary about the task that we're trying to undertake in this area and what's going on with this species. So this is going to be a screening. The screening is going to be this Friday from 6 to 7. And if you would like, you can scan the little code there and RSVP today. But if you would like to come to the zoo and see this little documentary, we would love to see you all there.
Returning the Negros bleeding heart dove to the wild. Matt, Ysabella. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Jeff. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you all had a nice lunch and you are revitalized, energized, and ready to learn about some critically endangered species. I'm going to try and figure out how to work this machine. This one's laser. Yeah. I noticed the fish react when the laser hits it, so it's like playing with a cat with 1,000 of them. So, my name's Matthew. This is Ysabella. We're going to talk to you today about a project we are working with Toledo Zoo on the critically endangered Negros bleeding heart dove, specifically trying to get this guy back to the wild. So a little bit of information first about us and our foundation. We represent the Talarak Foundation, based here on the island of Negros, that's Negros, on the West Visayan region of the Philippines. The Philippines is an archipelagic country in Southeast Asia. And we have been involved in wildlife conservation since our inception in 2010. Predominantly with endemic species to that region. So the Philippines has over 7,000 islands, but many of those species are restricted to a handful of islands within each geofaunal region. We started with captive breeding and captive management. We operate a zoo called Negros Forest Park. This is where we do our primary captive breeding and management of those endemic species. But as Toledo Zoo and a lot of good conservation zoos these days, we are also open to the public for education. We do work with schools and events to make sure that conservation is at the front of what we do. But we also run a national park. So we have the BioCos Nature Reserve. This is a map of it here on our island, sort of just down there in a tiny bit. It's a 300-hectare secondary grade forest, which we have created as a private nature reserve. And this gives us the unique opportunity to breed endemic species within our captive breeding center and release them back into their natural habitats. This is the ultimate goal of zoos all over the world, but it's incredibly expensive if you're breeding something in Europe or America and you're sending it back out to Southeast Asia. We have the ability to breed something and release it right out your back door. The species we're going to talk about today is the Negros bleeding heart dove, or Gallicolumba kii. It's called the bleeding heart dove because, as many of you can see, it has this red bleeding heart plumage in the middle of a white breast. There you go, the fish. And this is characteristic of the 5 bleeding heart dove species. So this is one of 5 bleeding heart dove species to the Philippines. You may have seen and heard of 2 of the other bleeding heart dove species, which they have here in Toledo. Anyone know what the other 2 species are? Anyone been to the Aviaries and seen bleeding heart dove somewhere? Luzon bleeding heart dove, gold star here at the front. What's the other one? The other one is the Mindanao bleeding heart dove. So these are also endemic to the Philippines, 2 different regions. Our bleeding heart dove is critically endangered and is only found on these 2 islands. So 2 out of 7,000 islands. And even within that, there is an estimated 50 to 250 birds left. This is a really difficult situation for the species. And those portions you see shaded here are the 2 remaining known locations for the species, but this one, this is at the southern tip of Negros Island, only 5 records have been counted in 6 years. So that population is most likely already functionally extinct. This is very much the stronghold for the species in the northwest of Panay Island. What we do know of this species, similar to its cousins, the Luzon and Mindanao bleeding heart, it is a lowland forest preference, maybe even a specialist, and it is a ground dove. Its Latin name, Gallicolumba, means chicken pigeon, because they walk around the ground and they forage in the forest floor. Unfortunately for the bleeding heart dove, this was part of its doom. The lowland forests of Negros Island have been reduced from around 90% forest cover in the 19th century to 3% primary forest remaining in the late 20th century. And that 3% was all above 700 meters elevation, which is not lowland forest anymore. So with this massive timber concessions leading into agricultural expansion, the habitat was wiped out for this species, and it became far more vulnerable then to other threats, such as invasive predators like cats and rats, to hunting and bycatch, people putting out mist nets to catch random birds, and this animal gets caught, but also a more serious long-term threat, climate change. In the Philippines, we are seeing super typhoons, which are basically category 5, 6 hurricanes on a regular basis. Heavy rains, high wind speeds, destruction of landscapes. These are very extreme storms. This bird is a small, fragile bird. This is a very precarious situation for our bird to be in. Another issue we have, this bird was very poorly studied when it was around. And now it's so rare, it is incredibly hard to learn more. This is a big challenge we are facing. So we had to think about conservation of this species, and we held the West Visayas Conservation Workshop in 2019, gathering experts from around the world, 80 to 90 participants, and Toledo Zoo were part of it. You can see a very handsome young man here representing Toledo Zoo who came to this workshop to be with us. And in this workshop, Joe, as he mentioned earlier, saw potential with the Bleeding Heart Project to be part of Toledo Zoo's conservation future. And so then in 2021, we formalized this with a relationship, a memorandum of agreement, and we've been working on this species ever since. And in 2022, Joe came out to see us and actually helped to start the Negros Bleeding Heart Reintroduction Program. So this is a pioneering program being done for this species to try and restore it back in the wild. And now we have a not so short video, a little bit about this project and the people working behind it.
After decades of deforestation and land conversion, a rare pigeon now faces the brink of extinction. Found only on 2 islands of the Philippines, its striking red mark on the chest is more than just plumage.
Mauubos kung hindi natin maprotektahan sila, wala na silang makita ng mga hayop.
There's still a lot of people who are ignorant about their conservation status, about their threats.
So as humans, we have the power to keep other species from going extinct.
That's why conservationists in Negros Island are working tirelessly to save the Negros bleeding heart pigeon. In the southern part of Negros is one of few remaining forest patches in the island where threatened animals can once again thrive in their natural habitat.
Basically, this is the last step for a captive breeding program. It's where you return animals back into the wild. That's the entire point of a captive breeding program, is you keep these animals in captivity so you have a stock which you can then either keep or reintroduce into areas where they once were.
Here in Bayawan Nature Reserve, husbandry looks a little different. This is a 300-hectare protected forest managed by Talarak Foundation. And this is a camera trap that they position in different parts of the reserve to observe the behaviors of the animals and how they're doing.
5%. 1,000 videos.
Behind the release program of the Bleeding Hearts is the support of Toledo Zoo in the United States, whose expertise and funding ensure that Talarak's conservation efforts have the global backing they need to succeed.
So most of the enclosures are here. But as for the Bleeding Heart, they decided to put them somewhere more secluded and more quiet.
From the center, so Negros Forest Park, we bring them here. We don't release right away because that's just too stressful for the birds. We keep them in a soft release enclosure, so an enclosure that's out in the middle of their habitat for them to get accustomed to their surroundings. After around 2 weeks up to a few months, then we'll start to open the enclosure, but we don't scare them out. We let them go out at their own time.
Siyempre, malaki na yung kanilang ng natural habitat. So siyempre okay, ito na masaya na sila kasi parang free na sila.
In 2019, the Conservation Planning Specialist Group held a workshop that gathered local and international experts from the IUCN, zoos, conservation groups, and the DENR-BMB to plan actions for the West Visayas Big Five species. And for the Negros Bleeding Heart, they've set 4 priorities: finding new populations, protecting existing ones, expanding the captive breeding, and trialing releases of the captive bred birds. Now, they may be moving forward with the plans to rewild captive populations, but continue to face difficulties in finding other bleeding hearts in the wild.
They remember it, they say they've seen it, but we can't just rely on word of mouth.
Before the bleeding hearts are released, Justin carefully fits the bird with this radio tracker to monitor their movements and better understand their behavior within the forest.
Our biggest challenge is actually to get them to breed because they have very specific habitat requirements. And we're trying to meet those here in the reserve with our reforestation activities as well as curating to an extent that it remains as natural as possible, the areas where they live in. And learning their behavior, obviously, because that entail gives us a better insight on how to breed or how to get them breeding in the wild.
On a regular basis, they track the bleeding hearts during the day.
Ito po yung tinatawag na radio receivers. Ito po yung naghanap po ng transmitter para sa Koral kung saan yung banda yung hinahanap namin. Ito po si bleeding heart frequency.
si Sir Dodong habang nagtatrack kami. Meron siyang na-spot na bleeding heart dito sa taas.
Seeing them here, slowly adjusting to this forest might seem like a trivial moment, but it offers a glimpse into a time when nature and humans once lived in harmony.
This is one of the important things that they need to do to study the behaviors of these animals and to check out how they're doing at night, basically.
The release has given Talarak valuable insights into the birds' ecological needs, their range, the threats they face, and now we're seeing them grow so comfortable that they're beginning to pair up and build nests. Around the month of July 2025, they observed the very first Negros bleeding heart chick successfully bred in the wild. But what followed was a series of storms that struck the country, and the island of Negros was no exception. Unfortunately, the chick did not survive. If anything, that serves as a proof of concept for what Talarak is doing to save the species.
Each animal has its own intrinsic value, wherein it's valuable just because it's alive. So as humans, we have the power to keep other species from going extinct.
We really want to conserve them. So all of us. So I'm very optimistic in restoring and reintroducing them in their natural habitats.
But for that to happen, we need more people like them who are willing to take on the challenge and stand between these animals and extinction.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the video that shows our reintroduction program supported by Toledo Zoo. So what have we learned about our species and the reintroduction so far? In our initial release in 2022, we released young unbonded pairs from the soft release aviary. This is our first release aviary that we did, with one pair released every 4 weeks, a total of 8 pairs, 8 individuals, sorry. Our findings showed that, unfortunately, these pairs did not bond and movement was erratic. Their lack of interest in each other often led to erratic movements, with some individuals leaving the reserve altogether. However, one individual, Daphne, this one here, she adapted quickly and provided data on movement and space use. So this is her range. This is her total range, and you can see that she ventured around and outside the reserve, but with the light pink shading, that's where she spent most of her time, and the dark pink being her core area. Oh, we also found that rats were a major predator, and the reason for this was because the enclosure was quite low. It was only 6.5 feet. And this encouraged the birds to roost low at night, which made them more vulnerable to rats. However, because of Daphne and her resilience, she avoided the rats and provided over a year's worth of data, and she gave us hope for the success of the project. You can see here, she's chasing a common emerald dove, and they showed that we were worried because they're captive bred that they might not adapt well, but she showed us otherwise. Taking what we learned from the first release, we modified our follow-up release in 2024. We now combined our male and female birds into a mixed-sex cohort. We placed all 10 of them in a much larger aviary. Here you can see here, it's about 16.4 feet tall. And we already see that they perch quite high within the aviary. This aviary provided the birds with more room to set social hierarchies, as well as learning to perch higher in the trees. And we observed them perching higher after tracking. So this is around 2 meters high, and it showed, based on our data, there was less mortalities with this group, and all individuals were adapting well, and they stayed in the area longer, and there was less erratic movements. So these factors help the birds adapt much better and survive longer. They learn to forage and survive independently. So what's next? As you saw in the video, we had some success with 2 birds pairing and breeding. Sadly, the first nest was not successful, but we hope for more nests and breeding within this group in the future, and for future released bleeding hearts, so that we can create a new population to help the species redistribute. We also collect a lot more data from the tracking. We can see where in the reserve our birds seem to spend most of their time. So this is most, and this is the soft release enclosure. And we need to analyze this further to identify why these are the preferred areas, and use that information to improve other areas in the reserve to support the growing population. This information will also help us to identify further areas for reintroduction within the island. These doves need a helping hand to recolonize its natural range, and this is just the start of a long but promising journey. Thank you all for listening, and a huge thank you to Toledo Zoo for being the sole donor and supporter of this project. Thank you for seeing the value in this small and overlooked dove. Let's keep their hearts beating together. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt and Ysabella. That was great. We have 2 species of bleeding heart doves here at the zoo, not the one that's being released, but you can see them both in our aviary. Next up, we have caring for and improving the welfare of rescued gorillas in Cameroon with Tori Kerr-Smith and Jerry Eilmer. And this is a really interesting project, since the Toledo Zoo is collaborating with them, but it's all being done virtually, which is kind of novel, I think. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jeff. Cheers. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'd just like to say it's a real honor to be here at this 125th anniversary, and thank you very much to Toledo for having us over. Before I hand over to Tori to talk about our gorilla care, I'm just going to give you a brief introduction to what we do at Limbe Wildlife Centre. My name's Jerry Eilmer, and I'm the manager there. I've been there for about 4 years now. So who are we? We're a small wildlife centre in southwest Cameroon, originally set up for the primates, for our gorillas, chimpanzees, the local drill monkey. And in Cameroon, we're pretty unique. We're a partnership with the government of Cameroon, between our NGO and the government of Cameroon, established in 1993, and we celebrated our 30th anniversary quite recently, which I was thought was quite a long time, but it rather pales into insignificance against 125 years. Our mission is to conserve the Cameroonian wildlife, partly by rehabilitating and caring for victims of the illegal wildlife trade. We take in basically any animal, any Cameroonian wildlife in need. It's to inspire people to connect with nature and improve the local communities around us well-being. So we're a small place. We're on a 4-hectare site within the town of Limbe. I've got some numbers here, give you some idea. We've got 40 staff and so on. We normally have about 180 primates at any one time. And we're right down here in as I say, southwest Cameroon, near the border with Nigeria. It's very tropical, steamy climate. So Toledo started supporting us at the beginning of this year, primarily with the care of our gorillas and a few other projects as well, for which we're incredibly grateful, as well as taking in those rescued animals from the illegal wildlife trade, often orphan babies. We release what we can to the wild. So we've got a long-running African grey parrot release program. You can see it down here in this corner. One of West Africa's most trafficked species. So we put those back in the wild. We have a education program. Now this is Wilson, our head of education, giving one of his classes in now 14 local schools around the Limbe area. We reach over 2,000 school kids, I think, which is really important. And we also have an alternative livelihoods program over there, the Green Project, where we essentially, in exchange for providing green browse for our project, they reduce their dependence on hunting and activities that are damaging to the local forests. So my final slide, we've got some exciting plans coming up, which I just really wanted to talk about briefly. As I said, we're only on a 4-hectare site in the town of Limbe at the moment and desperately need to expand. So we've got permission from the government to have about a 1 kilometre squared site within the Mount Cameroon National Park. Now, the town of Limbe here, just towering over it is this massive volcano. It's an active volcano called Mount Cameroon. It goes up to over 4,000 metres. So it goes right from tropical forests at sea level through savanna landscapes and up to barren rock at the top. And it's surrounded by a national park. It's a pretty special biodiversity hotspot. It's got some unique species, such as the Mount Cameroon francolin, and it's got active populations of drills, chimpanzees, and endangered forest elephants. So it's a pretty amazing place. We're going to put a wildlife centre up there where we can rehabilitate some of our species to natural forest conditions. And what that will allow us to do is then start releasing those species into the Mount Cameroon National Park to try and boost wild numbers. We'll probably start with the drill monkey, which is endemic to our region. It's got a very small range around southwest Cameroon, the border region with Nigeria. There's less than 4,000 left in the wild. So we'll start with drill monkeys and then start releasing probably other primates as well, in partnership, again, with the government. So it's a very exciting project. It should allow us to increase the awareness of the local population to the plight of these incredible animals, and have a very strong community focus as well. I think there's a lot of problems with the local communities around where we'll be in the new site with human-wildlife conflict, which you've heard a bit about earlier on today. But there's problems with the forest elephants crop raiding. They also have problems with some of the monkey species crop raiding as well. So we can try and address some of those issues for them, but also, I think, importantly, show there are benefits to be had from the wildlife, such as dollars coming in from ecotourism, more jobs to be had at the sanctuary, and so on. So I think that's a very important aspect of this. So thank you from me. Thank you, Toledo Zoo. I would just say, if you want to know more about any of this new project or what we do at Limbe Wildlife Centre, look us up online, limbewildlife.org, or come and talk to us. And particularly if you yourselves or know anybody that might be able to help us. It's a pretty big undertaking, a big project. We're going to start with this new extension. So please do come forward and talk to us. Tori and I will be here the rest of today and all of tomorrow. You can find us online. So thank you very much. And with that, I'll hand you over to Tori.
So I have the privilege this afternoon of introducing you to our gorillas and to our gorilla program. So at the Limbe Wildlife Centre, we have 14 gorillas. So I've tried to put a photo of each individual gorilla on a slide. Please don't tell them if I forgot someone, because I really do need them to like me. But yes, as Jerry said, we are a rescue centre for these guys. So gorillas as I'm sure will come as no surprise to a lot of you, are critically endangered in the wild. So the threats to gorillas across their range, and specifically in Cameroon, are things like deforestation, the illegal pet trade, war. So Cameroon is currently considered a conflict zone. There's issues there, so there's some areas of the country that we can't access, other areas that are considered UN conflict zones at the moment, which obviously makes any sort of conservation program very difficult. And then the bushmeat trade. So I'm sure a lot of you may have heard of the gorilla that was rescued in Turkey in Christmas time last year. So he's still in Turkey at the moment. He was found on a flight from Nigeria to Turkey, but most likely he originated in Cameroon. So there is still a constant flow of primates coming out of Cameroon into that illegal pet trade. So we exist to try and provide a home for those animals that are orphaned because of that crisis, and to provide an education network to try and stop that from happening again. So yes, our gorilla family, we've got 14. They range in age, that's wrong, sorry, should we say 16 to about 31. So our youngest 2 gorillas had their 16th birthday the other day. We threw them a birthday party. It went great. And they are, as I said, illegal victims of the bushmeat and the wildlife trade. They're orphans both from within the country, but we also have animals that were rescued from international smuggling rings. And we do have 2 gorillas that were born on site, because as I'm sure anyone who works with animals will tell you, as the Jurassic Park line, nature finds a way, and no matter how good your contraceptive program is, you end up with babies. So we do have 2. They are our 2 16-year-olds. So they were born at the center. So introducing you to some of our individuals. So this is Twigs. This is Brighter. And then we have Twigs. And these 2 were repatriated to us from Nigeria a number of years back. Twigs is actually disabled. She has no use of her right arm and limited use in her right leg. But her group really tolerates her. The silverback in her group, his name is Chella, and he looks out for her and he tells the others off if they're bullying her, and makes sure that Twigs gets her fair share. So she's very well looked after in our group. We also have 2 gorillas from a famous group called the Taipang 4. So the Taipang 4 were 4 gorillas that were smuggled in 2007 from the wilds of Cameroon, headed to Malaysia. So they were intercepted on the way to Malaysia. They spent time in South Africa before finally being repatriated back to Cameroon. So of those gorillas, we have 2 females, Abby and Tinu, who still live with us at the center. So they are a bonded pair. So some of our recent successes and achievements in our gorilla program. As I said, we have 14 gorillas. They don't all live together. So of those 14 gorillas, we have about 4 groups and different combinations. And as Jerry said, we only have 4 acres of space. So you can imagine trying to work out housing arrangements for that many animals that don't necessarily like each other is very, very difficult. So we recently undertook a program to split one of our outdoor yards in 2, and that maximizes the amount of time that each group can spend outside. We're also working on husbandry training. So a number of our gorillas are on the way to being injection trained. So one of our big males, we attempted our first injection the other day, and he tolerated it quite well. And we're working on blood draw training with one of our females who has epilepsy. She is incredibly food motivated, so as long as there's peanuts, she's cool. She's like, let's go, let's play. So she's doing really, really well, so we hope to be able to get blood from her very shortly and be able to test that those epilepsy medications are working as effectively as they should. And then we've recently successfully done a big gorilla integration. So gorillas are not easy to integrate. They're large animals with very distinct personalities that have the capacity to really injure each other if you get it wrong. So making sure that your integration is going well is a very difficult process and a very slow process. And we worked on it recently with 3 of our gorillas. Tinu has a skin condition, so she doesn't grow hair. Please excuse her nakedness, that's just her. So Tinu was one of those Taipang 4 that came from that big confiscation. So we needed to create a group with Abby and Tinu, who were already together, and are 2 of our sassiest, spiciest females. Abby and Tinu know what they want from life, and they know how to get it. They're very good at bullying our volunteers into giving them extra peanuts. They're very good at telling the males what to do. So when we needed to integrate them to Balinga, we obviously needed to be very careful, because if they pushed him too far, he is a big adult silverback who has the capacity to really hurt them. So our team undertook a very long and very stressful integration process. It took almost a year, but we're happy to say that the 3 of them are now living happily together in their outside yard as well as inside. So we have a quick video. I'm not sure how to play videos. I think my friend at the back is going to do that. So this is Belinga and Tinu, and this is one of the first times that we saw them playing together. So you probably can't, I'm not sure if you can hear it, but if you listen, you can hear them laughing to each other. And then you can see, here is Abby watching. So Abby is the dominant female. So she's watching just to make sure that this goes okay. She's probably also a little bit jealous. But yeah, so once we started to see stuff like this, we were really, really excited. This is obviously happy, healthy gorillas doing what gorillas are supposed to. So that was a really positive sign for us and let us know that our group was coming together and that we were well on the way. Oops, sorry. There we go. So some of the challenges that we still face with our gorilla group, we have a lot of problems with the diet for our animals. So we are very restricted by what is grown around the Limbey area. And so a lot of our diet is unfortunately very fruit heavy, and we'd like to move away from that. We've got to the point where some of our monkeys refuse to eat bananas now because they get them so often. So anyone who's worked with primates or seen a cartoon of a monkey will know that you've got to push them quite far before they stop eating bananas. So that's one of our big challenges. Another challenge we have is water availability. So I'll cover this a little bit later, but this is something that Toledo is helping us with. We are also at overcapacity, so 14 gorillas on a 4-acre site is too many animals. But as a rescue centre, we are their last hope. So we take everything that turns up. We're never going to turn anything away. And as Jerry said, we're working to create that expansion field site, which will hopefully address some of those capacity problems. And then enrichment is one of our other big problems. Obviously, with our gorillas, they're time sharing their yards. So one group is outside one day, the next group's outside the other day. So animals spend quite a lot of time inside, but we've been working with Beth and the Toledo enrichment team to kind of create really complex enrichment programs that we can use to kind of address that. Yes, so here we go. Here's some of the stuff that Toledo's been helping us with. So they've helped us fund a water tower, which will help us hold 10,000 extra litres of water a day. So at the moment we are on borehole. We only have water when the pump is turned on. So if we have no electricity, we have no water. I'm sure those of you who've worked at animal care facilities know that looking after animals with no running water is not fun. We also have to turn the borehole off for a few hours every day. So kind of between lunchtime and about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, we have no running water on site. So this water tank that Toledo is helping us to fund will mean that we'll be able to have water all day, every day, even when there's no electricity. So it might seem very simple, but it's game-changing for us. It makes a huge difference to the level of animal care that we can provide to our animals. So this is the tower, and then eventually we'll put the big water tank up here. But what's been more important and more helpful for us is the technical support that we've received from Beth and the Toledo team. So working with Beth, we've started to conduct structured animal welfare assessments, initially on our gorillas, but we hope to expand this to the rest of our primates. And that gives us really targeted indications of where we need to work on and what are our strengths and weaknesses. So using those welfare assessments, we can make sure that we're putting our efforts into the most important places possible. Future plans for our gorilla family, we want to keep rolling out these welfare assessments and working on the results of those assessments to create more complexity for our outdoor enclosures, bigger enrichment programs, and all of that sort of stuff. So if you have any questions, as Jerry said, both of us will be around for the next 2 days. Please feel free to come and grab us at any time. This is Pichu. This is our epileptic gorilla. She is the sweetest girl in the world, sings to you every morning, lets you know about her day. And so I'll leave you, one of the things we can do really quick and easily for our enrichment program, being a tropical centre, is coconuts. So all of our gorillas are very skilled at opening coconuts, and they all have different preferences. So Arno, one of our males, he doesn't care about the coconut water. He just smashes it against a wall, doesn't care if the water goes everywhere. This is Benito. Benito's favourite part is the coconut water. So if I can work out how to play this, yeah. So this is his one of his females in the back here. You'll note he has 2 coconuts. That is hers, but he took it. So this is her sitting there waiting, hoping he'll look the wrong way. But you see, he's very particular about that coconut water, refuses to waste a single drop. Will open the coconut so slowly and so tiny so that he can get every single bit. So thank you all for your time today. Thank you for listening to us, and thank you again to Toledo for all of your help.